Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Short. I'm the National Young Adults Team Lead. Can I just remind you that this event is being recorded and will be sent to you along with the copy of the presenter slides after the event. Can I just ask everyone to make sure that they are on mute, please, and that they keep their cameras on if at all possible. Just to add that the recording of today's event will also be added to the Young Adult page on My Learning. So I'd like to welcome you all to this event that's been facilitated by HMPPS Insights, where we'll be launching the Transitions Policy Framework for the transition of young people from the Children and Young People Secure Estate to adult custody. To reflect that this framework has been developed collaboratively with my team and the Youth Custody Service, I'm co-hosting this event with Lauren Brothwood, who's the Head of Placements, Casework and Resettlement in YCS. Thank you all for your interest and for attending today. This new transitions process has been a long time in the making, with us having started this project back in 2020. So this event marks the beginning of this new process being operationally implemented. The event is planned to run for 2 hours and will provide background to the project, an overview of the new process, and include some helpful tips and guidance and first-hand experiences of staff and prisoners. We are blessed to have a number of presenters speaking today, and we're really grateful for their time and support. So we'll be hearing from Deborah Baldwin, who's the Head of Safeguarding Strategy, Casework and Community Partnerships in YCS, Lauren Brothwood, who is Head of Placements, Casework and Resettlement in YCS, and Jermaine Tapper, who's the Transitions Manager in YCS. Helen Wakeling joins us from the Evidence-Based Practice team. Kojo Answer from the Young Justice Advisors in Leaders Unlocked. Patricia Thompson, who is Senior Case Administrator from HMP Deerbolt. Lisa Lloyd, Head of Cumbria Probation Delivery Unit in the North West. Lisa Cheshire and Rob Twaits, who both work with me in the Young Adults team, and Alan Scott, Executive Director of Public Sector Prisons North. We do also have additional guests who are joining us on the panels to assist with questions and answers later on. So we've got Rachel Greaves, who is Head of Healthcare at HMP Deerbolt, Laurie Hunt and Gemma Buckland, who are from Transition to Adulthood Alliance, Victoria Harris and Jade Thika from Probation in Wales, Rachel O'Rourke and Cindy Henson, who are the Young Adults Clinical Lead and the Operational Young Adults Lead from the Directorate of Security, Rebecca Vickerman and Emily Bunjo from Women's Directorate, and Susan Walker, who is joining us from the YJB. So lots of colleagues that are joining us today, for which I'm really grateful. Throughout the event, you can use the chat function to pose any questions that you might have. Once we've heard all the presentations, we will put these questions to the panel. Please do specify in the chat if you want one particular panelist to answer your question. And what we will do is we'll send out a Q&A transcript after the event, which will include any questions that we don't have time to answer today. You can also turn on live captions if you need it. These may be helpful if you need additional assistance due to sound or hearing issues. If you want to do that, you can activate live captions. You click on More in your toolbar, which is the 3 dots, go to Language and Speech, and then turn on live captions. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to Deborah Baldwin from the Youth Custody Service to open our event today. So over to you, Deborah.
Thank you, Lisa, for talking us through all of that technical stuff, way beyond my capability, I can tell you. So brilliant. A really brilliant turnout today. So thank you for making time in your diaries to attend this event. I think we'll all take something away from it, even if you think you are an expert on 18, 19-year-olds and transitions. I'm fairly sure that we'll all learn something. Lisa really swiftly mentioned that this has been a piece of collaborative work in the making, and that stuff does not happen by accident. So this has been a genuine cross-agency piece of work between the prison side, probation side, YCS, as well as people in headquarters, and of course working with the YJB and yachts as well. So it's a really big effort, and I specifically want to thank Lisa, Lauren and Jermaine from my team, who you will hear from shortly, and Bill Kerslake, who I'm not sure is online, but he held the pen to write what is the transitions framework document. But you know, this teamwork is just down to really good effort and people caring about what they do and making sure that every 18-year-old who transitions into the young adult estate in custody has the best experience possible, because make no mistake about it, turning 18 and going into the adult sites is traumatic, hugely traumatic, and reducing the risk of that trauma reduces fundamentally deaths in custody. This is about what we are doing to protect those young men and young women who turn 18 in custody, who spent, you know, quite a lot of time of their adolescence, their childhood behind bars. And our job is to make sure they clearly somebody in a prison answering a call bell there, make their transition as seamless as possible. Many of our 18-year-olds are 18. It doesn't mean they're mature. It doesn't mean they're adults. They're still 18. And that means they're highly vulnerable. We know, and I'm not going to repeat it much, but to say that most of them will have had a number of adverse childhood experiences from a very early age. So this is a very troubled cohort of children and young people that we look after. They're very good at masking it. And also we're very good at adultifying them, because many of our young men particularly are big and tall and loud, and we suddenly think because they're taller than us, certainly most of them are taller than me, that's for sure, I'm only 5'4", you know, that we think they are older than they are, and they're not. They're vulnerable and frightened young men. We have we operate differently in YCS. We have different sectors in our estate. Many of our young people, children and young people, live in very small groups. So, for example, in one of our secure children's homes, where some 18-year-olds currently live, they're living in groups of 6 with 6 staff. So they've got really high staffing ratios and very small group communal environments. And their experience in custody is very different than when they move into the adult estate, where the staffing ratios are much lower and they're likely to be living in groups of 60, 70, 80, over 100 other peers. So the risks are completely different. You will have known, because you can't not know if you work in HMPPS, that there are significant population pressures in the adult estate at the moment. And in order to assist those population pressures, we have in the YCS agreed to continue to accommodate our 18-year-olds up until their 19th birthday. This morning, I think we had 104 18-year-olds in our estate. Now, not all of those would have transitioned into the young adult estate, because some of them we would have continued to accommodate until their release into the community. And some of them might be subject to parole, and we would delay their transitions till we got a parole hearing. But nonetheless, 104 18-year-olds in our estate at the moment, which we're holding on to ease the pressures in the young adult state. Operation Safeguarding, as that's known, is changing how we're working, and Lauren and Jermaine will go on to this later in terms of the work of the central management team in planning those transitions. But let me make it really clear to those colleagues of ours who'll be working with those nearly 19-year-olds in the coming months in the young adult estate. They will be bigger, they will be taller, but they will not be any less vulnerable. So all we're doing in delaying that transition from 18 to nearly 19 is delaying the age at which they move. We are delaying the risk, but they will be no more able to cope at nearly 19 in the young adult estate, in the adult prison system, than they were at 18. So when you are receiving a nearly 19-year-old, they have the same vulnerabilities and risks as they would have done had they come at 18. So this transitions work, this teamwork, and how we will work together to protect and safeguard the lives of these young men and women who will go into the adult state remains vital, and probably becomes even more vital as these young people are older, they look older, and that will hide a lot of their vulnerabilities. So really grateful, particularly for colleagues in the young adult estate joining us today. I think it remains for me to say, after this workshop, the work continues, and we will always be at the end of a phone. We know our young people really, really well, and we stand by. Lauren and the team are on standby. If you need any help with any young person you receive from us, we will be on the end of the phone to help you with anything in the information we have about them that will help you do your jobs better in looking after them in the adult estate. I'll finish there. I'm staying around for the whole of the event, and we'll join the panel discussion later. But I'm now going to hand you over to Lauren, who's going to talk you through the transitions framework from the YCS side. Lauren.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give you a bit of context and background for now, and then later on we'll talk through the actual framework. Jermaine, who you may see on a different camera, is sitting next to me, so I'm not talking to myself when I'm kind of talking. So just a bit of context around how we've got to the position we're in. So what I'll do is give you a bit of an overview of what the previous process was, because that will start to show you some of the challenges that we faced and how we've ended up with this transition framework. So previously what happened was the YCS, as in the central team, it was the placements team would oversee the transitions from our secure children's homes and our secure training centres.
Yeah, but for some reason,
but not the YRYs. The YRYs would do their own transitions themselves. That did cause some lack of consistency from even kind of the work that we did compared to the YRYs, but also interlinked between the different establishments. There was a lack of consistency. Some of that was around relationships with the adults estate. So some of our YRYs would have a really good relationship with kind of a feeder young adult establishment and would therefore routinely use those to kind of transition their young people. In addition, there's a lack of consistency around preparation. So some children would get months and months of preparation times. Others were told literally a few days before their 18th birthday that they were transitioning, or some were not actually told at all and would transition on their 18th birthday. The other bit that we kind of picked up on around the transitions, which is why we led the transitions framework, is actually 2 deaths in custody from transitions from our estate into the adult estate, and the learning taken from those PPO reports, mainly actually around information sharing. There was no oversight of information sharing between one establishment to another, and that's built into the transitions framework, that the central management team will have oversight and assurance of that information sharing. Also, what will happen is, as Deborah has said, we're making sure those channels are open for you actually to come back to us and ask us for more information afterwards as well, so that you do have a point of contact. Normally, mainly in the framework is for 3 to 6 months. We'll go through that phase afterwards, but we are also always here for any other period of time after that. One of the big changes in the framework, which we will go on to later on, is around the focus on preparation. So we have actually blocked out a solid period of time for a child to be prepared to go to the adult estate. At the minute, that kind of just includes a phone call with the follow-on establishment, and that is something we want to move away from to make sure there is consistent kind of communications backwards and forwards between both establishments. The child has frequent meetings, not just one meeting. Visits in person rather than video call, that sort of stuff. Again, that will come out later on. The other bit of learning that we took was there was no escalation. So what would happen is we'd go to one adult establishment, they would say no, they could not meet that individual's needs, or for non-associates, etc. And then we'd just again go on to the next establishment until somebody said yes. And what would then happen is that they wouldn't end up in an adult establishment that actually can best meet their needs or is the identified establishment. Within the framework, there's a clear escalation process, which goes all the way up to PGD level if we need to, if we think that is the most appropriate establishment for that individual. This work feeds into a piece of work that Lisa Short was doing, which she's going to talk about in a minute. So it was kind of actually we were both doing separate things, and then we aligned together, didn't we, Lisa? So I'm going to hand over to you to talk about the work that you did and then how we eventually came to the framework.
Thanks, Lauren. So as the new young adult lead for prisons back in 2018, I was asked to look for examples of good practice of transitioning from youth to adult custody. So I undertook 6 months of field work where I spoke to a wide range of staff and prisoners from across both the youth custody service and adult sites. My findings were completely aligned with what Lauren has already described. No consistent process for making transition arrangements and placements not being decided based on individual need. Placements took a long time to agree, particularly for more complex young people, leaving little or no time for them to prepare for the move. So that impacted both on the young men, but also on the staff at the receiving adult prisons as well. So I spoke to young men who had already experienced transition and some who are preparing to move into the adult estate. And many young people who I spoke to had completely unrealistic expectations of what moving into the adult estate would be like. So I would hear a lot of things like, well, I just need to go straight in there and hit the first person I see, because that way no one's going to mess with me. Or in stark contrast to that, the fear and anxiety was clearly causing so much distress that boys started crying when I asked them how they felt about moving. And it appeared that both mindsets would likely result in violence and or self-harm. And it was clear that more effective preparation and reassurance for young people moving into the adult estate was crucial for safe and decent transitioning. Without having had the time to have their expectations structured, there were many examples of life in adult prisons that young people hadn't considered, particularly as the day before they were considered a child, and then on their 18th birthday, they're transferred and deemed to be an adult. But some lads I spoke to post-transition described how intimidating seeing the black and white uniforms were, which in many cases held negative and traumatic associations, particularly when you think about the fact that they're being confronted with batons and cuffs and now parva as well. And that's incredibly different to the way that staff appear physically in youth custody establishments. The increased amount of time spent in cell in adult prisons, the lack of one-to-one support, having to take responsibility for getting themselves up in the morning, getting ready for work and education, choosing their meals and ordering canteen was all a new experience. Having a significantly reduced level of support and contact with key workers, offender managers or the equivalent all contributed to the perceived cliff edge that clearly exists between youth and adult custody, and they were unprepared for any of this. So that caused frustration and anxiety, which for an 18-year-old unsurprisingly ends up being translated into aggression, violence, self-harm, non-compliance and negative behaviour, which in turn results in punishment. So one of the things that we wanted to build into a new process was significantly more information, questions and answers and realistic preparation for young people. Listening to what they wanted to know was really important. Some examples I saw during my fieldwork of information leaflets being provided for young people by adult prisons included pages and pages of text and didn't answer the specific questions that they had or address the things that they were scared about. And it wasn't in an easy to read format. So allocating them a staff member from the adult prison to make contact with them in the months preceding their transfer, to build a relationship and help prepare them seemed a really helpful way to bridge this gap in the new process. But lads said that they would only trust what staff said to a certain extent. They want to hear it from someone who's been through it. Peer mentors are hugely helpful here, and there's significant evidence base for the benefits of peer support. So this also forms a recommendation as part of the new process that we've put together that Lauren and Jermaine will go through in a minute. Staff also, through no fault of their own, have extremely limited knowledge about the conditions in the youth custody estate, or that cliff edge that exists in the provision of services, resources, and the level of support given to young people. They don't know what low psychosocial maturity or autism look like, or the behavioural impact of traumatic brain injury and trauma, despite the fact that these conditions are prevalent in the young adult population. So improving staff awareness of these issues and giving them an understanding of how they can respond more effectively to them also seemed really important. Many of the lads that I spoke to felt aggrieved that they and their families hadn't been given a voice in the process or the decision making about where they went. Involving them in the process to feel part of it, doing with rather than doing to, is so powerful for improving trust in how authority is used and for improving the behaviour exhibited in response to the decisions that are made, even when the outcome is not the one that they're looking for. And there's a huge evidence base for this in procedural justice. With our YCS colleagues working on addressing the same concerns and gaps with the transitions process, we joined forces, and the transitions project was commissioned as a joint project by the executive directors for the Youth Custody Service and Public Sector Prisons North in late 2019. Coming up with the process seemed simple. It wasn't about reinventing it. It was about addressing the gaps that staff and young men had told us were so frustrating to them and which caused so many significant problems. The end product, which we've consulted really widely on throughout the course of the project, and which has now been signed off by the Prison Operational Management Committee and by policy, is what now needs to be implemented in prisons, and which we will describe to you today. Just finally, from a broader perspective, transitions is a subject that has widespread interest and which is increasingly coming to the attention of ministers and HMIP. More effective transitioning arrangements are recommended by the Justice Select Committee and HMIP, and there is a huge investment in this work by external organisations such as the Barrow Cadbury Trust and the Transition to Adulthood Alliance, Leaders Unlocked, the Alliance for Youth Justice and the Howard League, to name but a few. It's increasingly a widespread concern that as children approach and turn 18, this transition into adulthood is not being handled as well as it could be and is leaving young people at risk of harm and continued involvement in the criminal justice system. So we have a responsibility to address this in the interest of care, improving well-being, improving safety, and also to support rehabilitation, reducing reoffending, and ultimately protecting the public. So I'm just going to hand over now to Helen Wakelin from the HMPPS evidence-based practice team, who's going to add some further context from an evidence-based perspective.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to just share one slide that I've put together, which I'm hoping that you can see. So yeah, as Lisa said, I've just been invited along today to just talk a bit about what the evidence tells us about the young adults and the transition period. So what is quite clear is that the research and evidence indicates that the transition period is an uncertain time for those going through it. As Lisa has already said, there seems to be a cliff edge of support, and the instability at this time can be really difficult for young adults. So our team, my team, have been currently writing an evidence summary, which is pulling together the latest evidence on young adults. And as part of this, we've been looking for academic articles related to transition. We didn't find much published research, but there was a few pieces of evidence out there. But what we can see from that research, as well as anecdotal evidence, it's really clear that the vulnerabilities of young people have in the past been overlooked in this transition process, and that young people typically feel unprepared for the transition and unsupported in the process. Essentially, the experience of transition seems to compound the vulnerabilities of this population and uncertainties, and kind of ruptures the support structures which they may have had already in place. So in one study, which specifically looked at the transition to the adult estate, young people reported feeling abandoned during this transition process. And there's actually really good scientific reasons for why young adults might find this period particularly difficult. So as many of you will know, young adults' brains are still developing. In fact, our brains are developing up until our mid-20s. Which means that we are still developing in many of our higher functioning processes. And it also means that we are still developing in our psychosocial maturity. Psychosocial maturity has three main components. The first is temperance, which is our ability to manage impulses and regulate our emotions. Perspective is the ability to take account of others' views and look at the kind of wider context. And responsibility is about being self-reliant and having a stable sense of self. Young adults may have low psychosocial maturity, which means that they may have particular issues with temperance, perspective and responsibility. People at this time of their lives are also more likely than older adults to be closer to traumatic events or abuse that they might have experienced in their childhood. So it's likely that this group are still trying to deal with these traumas. And we also know that young adults have an increased likelihood of other coexisting difficulties, such as brain injury and learning difficulties and challenges. And as well as this, these young people have likely had fewer opportunities to develop skills in managing difficult situations or practicing how to negotiate things on their own. We know that the evidence says that when people have been in contact with the criminal justice system, they typically have reduced opportunities to do these and practice these skills. So as a consequence of all of these things that I've just been through, young adults are much more likely to feel stress more keenly and be less able to cope with stress. They're more likely to be impulsive and they are less able to manage their emotions and their aggression. They're also probably less able to look to the future and plan for their future events. They also are likely to have a greater reliance on other people. We know at this time of people's lives, they're much more likely to be influenced by peers and need the support structures in place. And they are probably going to have a greater fear of the unknown and a greater likelihood of feeling uncertain, which is all really important in the transition process. And finally, they're likely to be dealing with this trauma and other difficulties that they may be facing at that time. So all of this means that this group are already feeling probably unstable. And therefore, it's really important that we look at the transition process and try to ensure that we reduce the instability as much as we can. So the evidence would say that we can do this by making it individualised and focusing on individual need, by making sure that people have sufficient time for the transition and settling in period, and that people have the support that they need at this critical time. And also importantly, that there's consistency in the support they receive during and after the transition. Young people also need to be given the information they need about the changes they're going to be going through and given adequate time to process this and ask questions. This will help to reduce their anxiety and uncertainty about the process. And of course, as Lisa mentioned, we need greater procedural justice in the whole process. So hearing the young adults' voices, listening to their concerns and acting on these, being respectful of these concerns and clearly outlining the process of transition and what this will mean for them. All of these things will help. Thank you. I'm going to pass back to Lisa now.
Thank you so much for that, Helen. It's really important for people, I think, in terms of adding some context to understand the evidence base. That was really helpful. I now want to hand over to Kojo, who is a young justice advisor from Leaders Unlocked, and he's going to share some lived experience perspectives with you. So over to you, Kojo.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So first, I'm going to start by reading a short story from a young adult who went through the transition period himself. We'll call him Joe, just for today's purposes. So my journey first began when I was transferred from HMYOI Wetherby on my 18th birthday. I thought to myself, just my luck. Sat on a prison bus for my birthday. I was in Wetherby for just over a year. That's where I started my 9-year sentence. I had an up and down behaviour pattern in Wetherby when I was first sentenced. My view on how Wetherby was going to be, my view on how Deerbolt was going to be when I arrived was completely wrong. It was relaxed, but never-ending countryside, making me feel as if it was driving around in circles. It was around 2 o'clock when I got a sudden feeling of anxiety as we arrived outside the gates of HMP Deerbolt. The bus then began to move very slowly and I heard a sound as if someone was dragging a rake across the concrete. I looked out the small window and it was the gates of Deerbolt opening. Then the bus became dark, like we were entering a tunnel. I stepped off the bus with my property, escorted into reception where an officer greeted me. She made me feel very welcome as I was processed with my property. Everything I had in Wetherby came with me, but I had, for example, 70 photos, which I was only allowed to take in 24. An officer then let me in and showed me the induction room. We went through some paperwork and he introduced himself. There was a lot of questions for me to answer and a lot for him to tell me. The questions were regarding health concerns, feelings of being here, sexuality and safety. He started to explain things about the wing, sales, work, healthcare, etc. He said everything will be explained to me in more detail tomorrow, and then he showed me to my cell and said this is where I'll stay for a couple of days. On the second day of induction, everything was explained to me in more detail this time. And also this time there were other people in the room who came in around the same time. And at the end of the talk, we were all given a booklet telling us everything about Dearbolt and the visits, PIN apps, etc. So I'm going to cut the story short there. So that was just a little insight into the actual transition journey. I'm going to reflect a little bit of my experience being a young adult in prison. And what keeps coming up, like we said, is support and communication and building relationships. That's paramount. That's what is needed to make a difference to help these young adults transition and actually have a meaningful time while they're in here and make the most of it. For me personally, I had good support outside and inside. So the inside support that I had was with certain officers, and they just little things, and as it little things like them telling me that I'm good at reading or I'm good at certain little things. So that gave me the confidence actually to, you know what, let me actually go and try and do something. So I became a mentor. So I started helping people in English. I started, I was on the community council, I was the wing rep, but that all came from an officer actually just acknowledging that he's seen something in me. And that's what got my ball rolling. And from there, I haven't really looked back. But what I wanted to also do was draw on some real life examples, because we can sit here and, you know, talk about it. But if I just wanted to bring some real life examples, what I've seen with my own eyes, how effective staffing can be effective. So there was one guy called Jack who I met while I was inside. He was a young adult. He was actually 19 actually at the time when I met him. That's Jack's not his real name, but yeah, Jack. And Jack was self-harming. He couldn't really read or write. His reading and writing levels were at a primary school level. He didn't want to come out and associate with anybody. So what, and he did used to self-harm. So what actually happened was he moved to another wing, and there was one officer there who actually took the time to, so what this officer would do was sometimes if he's behind his door, he would go and stand next to his door and talk to him. If it was association, he would stand next to him so that you can still see the wing, but have conversations with him. And he slowly built up a relationship with Jack. And what happened was they found common ground somewhere. He found out that they've both been in care. So that was something that Jack could relate to. And he thought, oh, well, he's been in care, now he's a prison officer. So that officer then recommended Jack to me, which I used to help Jack with his reading, with his writing, with his maths, and get his confidence up and get his basic skills up so that he could actually work within the prison as well. After all of this, cut a long story short, Jack managed to transform his whole sentence around. By the end of it, Jack was actually working, and he started to write poetry. He wasn't the best at spelling, but now he had a grasp of how to write and how to read. And all of this happened with just one officer taking that time out to actually get to know Jack and finding a common ground and making Jack realize that actually there is support in here. And then that officer signposted him to me, where I was able to help him as a peer. So all of these factors came into play and changed his sentence. I'm not sure how long I've got left, Lisa. If I could give one more or call it a day.
Yeah, you're fine, Kojo. Yeah? Carry on. Okay. Yeah.
And last thing I wanted to just touch on was, I wanted to give another quick example. This one will be a bit shorter, of a prison officer called Abby, and Abby was an officer that I came across as well. Now, Abby was a very, very good officer because he had a very unique way of just, well, not being one of the lads, but you always had the line. You knew where the boundary was, and you knew where the line was. But he was relatable. Everybody could talk to him. No one had a problem if Abby said, "Today I can't let you out," because it's Abby. We know that if Abby says it can't happen, it can't happen. And that just led to a feeling on the wing where it was just a bit more calmer than other wings. So when you come over here, and if there was anybody new that came over here and wanted to try and give Abby grief, the whole wing was letting them know, "No, you can't do that, mate." Yeah. So that in turn, even that made sure that the officers were safe, because everyone wanted to keep the environment how it was. Nobody wanted to come and spoil it. And that was all created because of Abby and just him being relatable, just him being a down-to-earth person, getting to know the lads, taking time out, using his discretion. It's not every time that because sometimes when you do things by the book, it looks like you don't care about them. But when you sometimes show a little bit of discretion, and again, like I said, it's not too much, but you show a bit of discretion, you do this, you go a bit above and beyond, it makes a big difference. So I'll end it there because I could talk all day. But again, like I said, I think it all boils down to effective relationship building, just communication, just talking, just the human interaction, just talking. And I think that's it. So yeah, so thank you for listening, guys.
Thank you, Kojo. I'm really, really grateful for you coming along and sharing some of those experiences today. And I think that the stuff that you're pointing out is just how important those relationships are, and how what's a very little thing for one person to do actually has a huge impact on individuals. So thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Lauren and Jermaine, who are going to go through the new transitions process with you. So without any further ado, over to you, Lauren.
Thank you. I'm actually going to hand over to Jermaine, but I will introduce him first. So the link to the transition framework will hopefully be put in the chat shortly. It is quite a long framework, but actually a really in-depth framework, which talks around the 6 stages of transition, the preparation for transition, and after transition, which Jermaine will talk to you through shortly. It will be quite high level. I will summarise why afterwards towards the end of the event, and you will get a guidance as well, which talks you through the different 6 stages. So please bear with us while we talk through it. You will get some more information in relation to it. So I'm going to hand over to Jermaine, who oversees the Transition Central Management Team, for him to talk through the 6 stages of transition.
Yeah. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Jermaine Tapper, and I'm the Transitions Manager within the Youth Custody Service. I'll be speaking through the 6 stages of transition planning, but firstly, I'll highlight the 3 core stakeholders responsible for transitioning children, who I will refer to. This is the Children and Young People Secure Estate, the Adult Estate, and the Central Management Team. There are many more stakeholders involved in transition planning whose impact on the child is significant. However, for the purpose of this event, I'll focus on the CMT and the estate primarily. The CMT commenced service in November with a key aim of implementing the policy framework. One of the aspects of the introduction of a CMT, Lauren's referred to this earlier within this event, was to release resource for establishments to focus their resource on supporting and preparing young people to transition. One of the team's objectives were to implement a standardized, consistent process to transitioning children and developing relationships with our adult estate partners. Transitioning young people is an individual dynamic process, so there's a variation to service involvement. I will outline the key points and requirements within the service delivery of transitioning for young people. What you will see on your screen is the 6 stages of transitioning planning, which I'll go through each stage individually. So the first stage is initial identification and planning the transition board. A lot of this work falls within the responsibility of the Central Management Team and the Children and Young People Secure Estate. The Central Management Team look at our cohort with the outcome of identifying those who are in scope for transition. We then liaise with our colleagues in the estate and have those early conversations on the options. Equally, there may be individuals who we may not identify for a number of reasons who are in the estate, and they identify them for transition. So a perfect example of that is a young person who we have on our system serving a specific sentence that ends, so there's no real requirement for them to transition. However, they're held on remand for other matters. There are 3 different types of transition, and these are early transition prior to reaching 18, natural progression upon reaching 18, and transition on remand. In most cases, what we would want is to transition young people who are sentenced, as it offers a placement in the adult estate that is what I would call a bit more stable. So what I mean by this is that they will not be imminently transitioned upon sentence. The central management team will arrange an initial multidisciplinary meeting with all relevant stakeholders to discuss options for transitions. The objective of this meeting is to understand the individual needs of the young person and whether it's suitable to follow the offender flows, or if for any reason we should consider stepping outside of this. We'll utilise this meeting to obtain reports to support recommendations. A number of actions could come as an outcome of this meeting, and one of those could be to approach an adult establishment to discuss individual children who we identify a placement as a specialist unit to understand the criteria and whether the young person meets this. So I'm going to go on to the second stage, which is this is actually the transitions board. So it's application to adult prison and placement approval. So stage 2 requires a multidisciplinary transitions board meeting to take place. We have our first transition board planned for April, and we'll have the terms of reference attached to this. This should be held within 6 weeks of the initial multidisciplinary meeting. One of the things I didn't say earlier was the actual whole transition process to go through all of these stages should take a period of 6 months. So within 6 weeks of our first initial meeting, we should be holding our transition board. We require stakeholders from the children and young people secure estate to attend, and identified colleagues from potential adult sites to also attend. Attendants from adult sites must be able to provisionally agree a placement, and to note, documentation will be shared by the establishment to support them in making an assessed decision. So we won't just have someone from the adult estate attend and they'll be given restricted information and then be told to make a decision on the spot. The Transitions Board is a multidisciplinary meeting incorporating the views of all key professionals involved in the care of young people. The role of the central management team is to coordinate and chair the Transitions Board meeting in accordance with the terms of reference. That will be something that you'll see within the guidance and within the policy framework. The central management team will sit within the YCS placement service. The central management team refer all cases to the Women's Estate WECAS meeting with the HMPPS Women's team for discussion and placement allocation. So following the Transitions Board, the site agreed as the most suitable placement will be formally contacted by the central management team to request approval of placement. So I'm going to move to stage 3, which is preparation for transition. And this is a key stage in the transition process, and this is where what I call all the quality information sharing processes take place. The central management team will make contact with the identified adult site establishment lead at a point as a point of contact to ensure all documents are shared. The objective of the central management team is to agree a provisional date of transfer, and this agreed date should be approximately 3 months after the Transitions Board. And it should be a date that's week commencing rather than the actual day at this stage. We also aim to confirm the reason why the identified establishment, and that's if it is outside of the offender flows. We will share details of key stakeholders, so we'll coordinate and share all of the key stakeholders involved in this planning and preparation stage. We'll issue a list of reports that the adult site should receive from the yacht and the establishment, and will also issue confirmation on probation's mandatory allocated caseworker. I'm not going to speak too much on probation because I know that there's a separate agenda item after me where we speak about the transfer from yacht to probation. The Children and Young People Secure Estate will So there's an expectation that the Children and Young People Secure Estate share all of the mandatory reports at the earliest possible opportunity, and they are updated within the time between the Transitions Board and the transfer handover meeting. I'm not going to go into the full details on what these documents are at this event, but what we're asking the Children and Young People Secure Estate to share is information at the site that the young person is going to, and explain the similarities and differences between the youth and adult estate. So this is what I was referring to earlier on implementation of the CMT, taking some of the, I'll refer to as organisational duties to free resourceful establishments to focus on preparing the young people. So effectively, the Children and Young People Secure Estate are focused on preparing the child, whilst the central management team will have oversight over the planning and preparation and approaching the adult estate and making sure all of the documentation, all of the documents are shared for the adult site. What we're asking from the adult estate is to allocate a caseworker for the child immediately after the Transitions Board. The expectation is that the establishment should, where possible, arrange for staff members to visit the young person in the site and join any initial sentence planning or review meetings. We're asking them to meet the young person, ideally in person. We're asking, and Kojo referred to this and how valuable this is, we're asking them to have an allocated peer mentor where possible. And we're also asking the adult estate to commit to maintaining the placement once the child is transferred for a minimum of 6 months. With all the transitions planning that takes place, it's important that the placement is maintained for at least this period to ensure the young person to benefit from all of the planning work that we're doing. We do acknowledge that there will be some circumstances where this isn't possible, but we would like to make this the exception. The final part of stage 3 in planning and preparation is the final handover meeting, and this must take place 4 weeks prior to the agreed transition date. Within this meeting, the final move date will be agreed, so that's an actual date rather than a week commencing. The adult and young adult estate must ensure that the date agreed is one where the allocated caseworker is available to ensure that the young person transitioning has a familiar contact upon arrival. In practice, we should avoid transitioning on Fridays with the approaching weekend regime. The central management team will conclude within this meeting the time of day and date of transition, the type of vehicle to be used to transfer the child from the youth to the adult estate, and we'll also look at management of complex needs and risks within this. One final point for preparation is that we want to ensure that the young person has already had their approved contacts agreed within the adult site, as this is a factor for anxiety upon arriving for young people. The 4th stage is quite short, and it's the actual transfer. At this stage, all relevant planning, preparation and documents should already be in place to ensure that the transfer takes place without any issue. There isn't really a huge amount for me to speak about on this stage, but I suppose the main part that I need to highlight is that there could be unexpected issues that arise, and so it's for all stakeholders to hold that level of being dynamic to adjust to any issues. So for example, there may be an issue with transporting the young person to the adult estate, and it may require flexibility from the adult estate, or maybe the young person changes their mind and doesn't want to go, and it may require flexibility from the youth estate. So within that stage, it's just for us to stay in contact and make sure that we're all dynamic. The 5th stage is mainly focused on the adult estate. So this is reception, first night and induction. The central management team will contact the adult estate to ensure the process is taking place in accordance with the individual plan and the policy framework. There are a number of policy frameworks around induction plans and induction processes within the adult estate, which I'm not going to go through all of them. The Children and Young People Secure Estate must ensure they have an open dialogue with the adult estate, and it's just to make sure that any unexpected issues can be addressed as soon as possible to benefit the young person transitioning. And the role of the adult estate, and I'm just going to mention a few key policies. They have their own policies and processes, but what we're asking is to ensure that the young person has met with their peer mentor if they've got one allocated. The young person has met with a member of staff allocated to support them through the transition. The young person has permitted property that they were approved to travel with. and the prison offender manager has met with the young person in line with policy. This should have all been agreed at stage 3, but the adult estate must ensure they've concluded the young person's visiting arrangements, access to money, accounts, earning, telephone, canteen, education, healthcare, let them know about the smoking policies, all other relevant policies that they may be interested in. But there's a long list of extensive policies that the young person would need to know, and that will be within the guidance, and there's a lot of reference to this within the policy framework. So I'll go on to the final stage and my final part within this, and this is stage 6, which is a follow-up. So once a young person is transitioned into the adult estate, the central management team will maintain regular contact with the key stakeholder within the adult estate, and this is just to cover and be available for relevant or unexpected circumstances where the young person may have moved somewhere else. We will also arrange a post-transitions meeting, and this meeting is primarily focused on ensuring that we have completed all of the transition actions accordingly. So it's not about case managing the young person and asking those and covering those sort of areas, or looking at whether the adult estate are doing things the way we would do it, I suppose, in the youth estate. It's literally to make sure that we can learn from how we've transitioned children and what information the adult estate actually need. We'll use this meeting to review the process of the transition specific to that young person, provide constructive feedback on the transition process, to ensure that the young person has understood the information related to them that has transferred between the sending and receiving establishments, and to confirm that the information has all been received that is required. And that's everything for me. So I just want to say thank you all for listening, and I'll hand back over to Lauren and Lisa.
Thanks, Jermaine. I know there was a lot of questions in the chat, and I know as you said that we'll discuss them at the panel at the end. So I'm going to hand over now to Patricia, who is from H&P Deerbolt. Deerbolt have made some, they were one of our pilot sites, so they have made some headway in introducing the new process from their end. And Patricia, I believe you're going to give a bit of an update in regards to that.
Yes, I am. First of all, thank you for allowing me to come and give our point of view here. The slides, I think, should be coming up any second now. Okay, so so Deerbolt was initially identified following a white paper in, I think it was 2021, because we already had a transitions process in place that we were working quite closely with Wetherby. Wetherby's our local intake site. That's initially just the white paper that set out that it was addressing the critical needs for reducing reoffending, which I believe we've already spoken about. Next slide. Okay. Yep. So that's the excerpt from the white paper where it's mentioned specifically Deerbolt. It says the transition from youth estate to the adult estate can be particularly difficult, and we were currently piloting a young adults transition unit at Deerbolt. So what we've done is we were having some of these meetings that Jermaine mentioned earlier, the initial contact, and setting up a multidisciplinary team to discuss the actual the boy that wanted to move to us potentially. So can you just move on to the next slide for me? Okay, so just a little bit about Deerbolt initially. So we're situated in the northeast of England. We have an operational capacity of 527. And the things that we can offer for people who are transitioning, we put together a video which was sent via Wetherby, and some of the other estates had, members of the estate had it as well. So we can do individual fitness programs. We have an AstroTurf pitch, which went down very well. So a wide range of education programs, and we can offer vocational qualifications. Like I said before, we already had a panel in place, and we were having meetings on bi-monthly basis, taking requests, like I said, initially from Wetherby, then Cookham Wood, Warrington, Oak Hill, Feltham and Park. So in total, we've dealt with 82 requests. Those in blue are the ones that we've accepted. As you can see, they're mainly from Wetherby, but it does Barton Moss, Cookham Wood. It also shows the number that we declined, and I think Jermaine touched on it before, is it could, the reason they've been declined is they could have associations here, they could be risk to stability here at Dearbold, but on the majority we do actually accept. So our transitions unit, it's separated from the main population. It has 8 double cells. Each offender has a personal storyboard which details their history, their offence and their sentence plan. And there's also a bespoke regime in place once the boys arrive on the transitions unit. The way we dealt with these initially was we made contact, and it's prior to the 19th birthday. Obviously, it was the 18th birthday. We requested all paperwork, transfer reports, MARAP, acid and extract. And at that point, we designated a POM contact as a peer mentor, and it was up to that person to make contact with the offender and try to build up a bit of a relationship with them, to discuss what their expectations were of Dearbold, what we could offer them. And we invited resettlement workers, yacht workers. Multidisciplinary team was made of our head of offender management. There were people from education, healthcare, mental health, education and security as well. Once a decision had been made whether we were going to accept the offender or not, the relevant wing staff on the transition unit would make contact with the offender via video link, via telephone, and an agreed frequency was set in place, so it would be weekly, monthly, depending on the complex needs of the offender. And like I said before, we work closely with both healthcare and mental health and agreed a transfer date following this. The daily routines, I've just put a quick overview of there. Working, what we expect of you, education, training and programmes. Gives them some expectation that they were seen by various agencies and that they would be expected to attend some form of employment or education. We're also told that they'll be seen by their offender supervisor, who is a bespoke person allocated to them, who will work with them to come up with a sentence plan to help structure the time and set some objectives. One of the programmes we offer here is Choice and Changes. It's something that's just been introduced recently, and it's to promote maturity in young adult men aged 18 to 25. And that's about it, really. The main focus always was and always will be making sure that there's a clear and concise and comprehended transition, because obviously it is a traumatic time for these young offenders to come into an adult estate. And the last thing we want to do is to bring them in and put them straight into the main population. So that's it. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you, Patricia. And hopefully that just kind of gives a brief overview of some of the steps that Dearbold have taken towards the new transitions framework. I'm going to hand over, I think it's to Lisa now, around the transition to probation, which Jermaine briefly touched on earlier.
Lovely, thanks Lauren. I'll just share my slides in the background and then hopefully get us started if that's all right. Super, so you should be able to see those slides now, hopefully. So my name's Lisa Lloyd. Thanks very much, colleagues, for inviting me today. My role is Head of Probation in Cumbria, but I hold the strategic lead in the Northwest for all the work that we do around young adults. So a little bit of that touches the prison world and some of it takes place in the community space. So I have that overall responsibility in the Northwest. In probation, we don't have, unfortunately, yet the team that Lisa has over on the prison side. So it's fair to say that our work is perhaps not quite as slick as the work that's been done on the prison side around all things transitions, but we're very much trying to learn from the progress and the developments that have been made on the prison side. And my input today is just going to really focus on sharing with people the key principles that exist around how we transition young people from the youth system to the probation system. So some of that incorporates the prison world, but some of it is it also takes place for people who are not in the prison system. So a bit of both from me today. So hopefully people will know some of the structures that exist across the probation system to support the transition of young people from the youth system to the adult system. And we've heard from everybody on the call today about the importance of us getting all of that work that we do around transitions right. Some of the things that really resonated from hearing from Kojo earlier around with the things he talked about in relation to making sure that we have effective support for the young people who are transitioning, but also that there's really effective communication. And I think that relates to all of the work that we do across the justice system, not just specifically with young people, but hearing from everybody today really makes us resonate, I suppose, that it is so important for us to get that communication aspect right. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to make sure that we do from a probation perspective, and looking at things through a slightly different lens than perhaps we have done previously. I've picked up a couple of things in the chat around the impact of resources from a probation perspective, but probably more broadly in relation to how we work with these particular cases. And what I would absolutely do is acknowledge that, and that is a real challenge for us at the minute, right across the system, isn't it, in HMPPS, how we're managing and dealing with some of those challenges around resources. But finding a way through those challenges is also probably one of the things that we're best at doing. And I think that's important to have in our mind today. But what I would also encourage all my colleagues, especially my probation colleagues who are on the call, to bear in mind when we're thinking about these cases is that we're talking about really, really tiny numbers. So as Deborah said at the opening of the call, today we had 100 young people in the youth custody system who are aged 18, so are potentially in that window for transition. And as we know, not all of them will transition. So there are very, very few people, and that's why it's so important from my perspective that we do all that we can to get that transition right. And we have a really important part to play from a probation perspective in that sense. The Joint National Protocol is the document that sets out all of our responsibilities regarding the transitioning of children and young people from the youth justice system to the adult system, to the probation system. And that protocol sets out a number of specific activities. We won't go through the detail of those today, but there's a final slide that holds some links to useful resources that people might want to access. And EQIP is always a good starting point for anything in relation to the young adult work. The principles that I wanted to hone in on really around the framework today are around some of the things that have already been covered. So at the outset, the framework in the protocol is very much looking to make sure that we recognise individual needs and requirements of all the children and young people that we're working with in that transitioning space. And it goes on to talk about the importance of maintaining that overview of those individual requirements and treating and looking at each case on its individual, based on its individual needs and circumstances. And that's absolutely a key driver really for the protocol and how we do and support that work around transition. We will, as part of the probation offer, make sure that we're supporting and working alongside our colleagues to identify those children and young people as early as possible. That piece was very much be led by our colleagues in the Youth Justice Service, but supported by the seconded probation staff who work across those teams out in the community too. We'll make sure that all the young people that are eligible for transition and who will go through that transition process, whatever that looks like for them as an individual, will have their own transition plan. And that plan will set out the responsibilities of all the people working with that young person in that transitioning process. We'll make sure that all the services and support that we're offering are flexible and that they're responsive and that equally they take account of protected characteristics. And I think that was one of the things that really resonated for me from Kojo's input earlier, is that making sure that people take an interest and treat individuals as individuals and not as a homogenous group is so important. We'll do all that we do in that transitioning space in partnership. We'll share information, we'll communicate, we'll collaborate and we'll listen. And all of that is really critical to that transition process. We'll work hard to make sure that children and families are actively involved in that transitioning process as well, and that their voices are heard and listened to. And that's something that I think we have to make sure sits at the heart of what we do. We can facilitate some of those opportunities to listen to and to hear from children and young people, but we can do that collaboratively with our partners as well. We've mentioned already the importance of making sure that we look at each of those cases individually and develop an individualised plan, and that's very much at the heart of the protocol. And then, as with all things that we do in the world of justice, we'll make sure that we appropriately review the decisions that we've made, the plans that are in place, to ensure that they're constantly changing and responsive to the individual needs of children and young people. As I've already mentioned, not all of the cases that are managed by the youth justice team, so either in the community or in the prison setting, will transition over to the probation service. Those decisions are very much made collaboratively and in partnership, so aren't made by one organisation or another, but are made very much collectively. And that just makes sure that where it's appropriate for young people to continue to be managed by the youth justice team, that does happen. So the next slide just talks about some of the key things that we must do in that process of transition. So we will absolutely ensure that the secondary probation officer is tracking all of the cases locally that potentially could transition from the youth justice team over to the probation team. And there'll be good links in all of the youth justice teams across the country between the appropriate manager and the appropriate senior manager, the senior probation officer in the community. The transitions plan that we talked about earlier, that will be in place from 17 years and 6 months. So that's still the case, even though young people are being retained in the youth system for slightly longer, as Deborah said, up to 19 years now. That transition plan still needs to stay in place, absolutely, and will be in place from 17 years and 6 months. As we've talked about already, everything that we do around those transitions will be done in a multi-agency way, and it'll help us to ensure that we put at the heart of all the work that we do around the transitions, the young person and their family, and helping to make sure that they're clear and understand what will happen at each stage of the process. We're trying really hard in probation to develop and grow our understanding around working in a trauma-informed way. And we've heard so much about why that's important this afternoon already. And that's one of the things that we're committed to doing, and one of the expectations that the protocol sets out that we must do. Where transitions happen in custody, all cases will be allocated to an appropriate POM prior to that prison move. So prior to that young person landing in the adult prison, we'll know who that prison offender manager is going to be. It might sound like a resource challenge, but given that the numbers of transitioning cases are so small, I wouldn't expect that there isn't a way around some of that resource challenge for all OMUs out there. It's a matter for you all and your individual teams to think about how you problem solve your way through some of those challenges. But I absolutely know that at the heart of what we do in probation across the piece, whether that's in the community or in prisons, is making sure that we're supporting the people who are experiencing that journey. And that's no different with this particular cohort. The coordination of all of that work from a community sense, and that formal transfer of responsibility for those individuals from the Youth Justice Service to the Probation Service, is located with the Youth Justice teams. We're a key stakeholder to that process from the probation perspective, from the work that Jermaine talked about earlier in terms of the transitions process and the principles and the stages of transition. We absolutely are a key stakeholder, but will be led by and guided by our colleagues in youth justice. That relationship between probation, prison and service user, person on probation, the prisoner, that is so important, as we've heard, for that relationship to get up and running as quickly as possible. And there's a commitment from the probation side, from the OMU side, that we'll start to work with that young person within 48 hours of them landing in the adult estate. And that's really important for a variety of reasons, but it hopefully will enable a good opportunity for that relationship, the relationship that Kojo talked about in his input, that's so important to that overall journey, but also to the successful outcomes that we want to see for those young people. It's so important that that relationship starts to develop as quickly as possible. And then, as we've also said, all transitioning cases will have a prison OM allocated, and those will work with all of those people, all the young people who are in custody, dependent on how that works, whether you sit within OMIC or not, is slightly more complex. But essentially, all young people who transition from the youth estate to the adult estate will have an identified prison OM. If those young people have got less than 16 months to release, they will also at that point in time have an allocated community offender manager, and that person will also be a key party to all of the planning meetings. So there are key things for us to do. Really keen to hear suggestions and ideas from people on the call today about what needs to happen in individual OMUs to make sure that that new approach, slightly new approach from a prison side, lands and is up and running as quickly as possible. The bits that I've talked to you all about today from the transitions protocol, they're not new. The transitions protocol isn't a new piece of work for us. It's been in place for some time now. And the principles of everything that we do in that space so that we work supportively and collaboratively with young people. So hopefully you'll get time and opportunity to take all of the information that we're sharing today back to your individual teams and have a think about how that will work in reality for you all back in the day job. So happy to take any questions at the end of the input today in the Q&A slot, and I'll try and pick up on those relevant probation ones in the chat in between now and then. So my final slide just talks about some of the key resources that I've referenced in that brief input today. And I think if anybody wants to, I think we'll share the slides once we've finished on the call today. So please feel free to pop any questions in the chat and we'll pick those up in the Q&A session at the end. So I will stop sharing my screen now. Thank you all for your time and for listening, and hand you back, I think, to Lisa Short. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Lisa Lloyd. There's too many Lisas on this call. But no, really, really helpful to get that perspective from probation and some of the guidance around what that looks like practically for probation support of transitions as well. So thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Rob Twaits and Lisa Cheshire from the Young Adults team, who are going to go through some practical tips for implementing the new process. So over to you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Lisa Cheshire, and with me is Rob Twaits. And as Lisa said, we're project managers with the National Young Adults team. And it's great to have the opportunity to speak to so many of you today about what you can do practically in your prison to prepare for and to embed the transitions process. Can we have the next slide, please? So we've heard today about the importance of the transitions process, and we know that when the process is consistent and the transition of the young person is well planned, this significantly improves both the short-term and long-term outcomes for those young people moving into the adult estate. You've also heard about the experiences of staff and prisoners who've lived and worked through this process and framework and the impact this has had. And because of this, we understand that everybody on this call will want to make sure you get it right and that we can give you support to do that. Some of you may already understand and have the process embedded, which is great. And our purpose today is to make sure that you have as much information and support as you need to make this business as usual. So in a second, I'm going to hand over to Rob, who will talk you through guidance documents, checklists and other sources of information available to help you in embedding the framework in your prison. He'll also discuss with you as well about a follow-up call that we're going to have with sites if you need more additional support after this event. So again, thank you for attending today. I hope you found everything interesting so far, and I will now hand over to Rob.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, as Lisa says, I'll go through some helpful tips for the adult establishment when receiving a young person from the youth estate. So it's crucial. Oh, sorry, can I get the next slide first? Sorry, otherwise I'll be talking about that's it. So yeah, it's crucial that adult prisons give transition planning and processes due time and consideration. Young people who move from the youth estate to the adult prisons are particularly vulnerable at this point due to their age, their level of maturity. And this, combined with the environment of an adult prison that they're not used to, can result in anxiety, behaviours such as violence, self-harm and non-compliance, as we discussed earlier. second point there, effective preparation of the young person prior to the transfer can have a positive effect on their experience, on the transition experience. Adult prisons who take steps to visit young persons prior to their transfer have reported much more positive relationships being built early on and continuing once that transition has been made into the adult state. Supporting staff to access specific information about the needs of young adults can improve the initial interaction and future interactions and help them understand the behaviours of a young person that they would otherwise deal with punitively. A wide range of support is available on My Learning in the young adult section, which I'll again point that out again in just a few minutes. New transitions should have rules, regimes and expectations explained to them clearly. And this can ideally be available in different formats, not just a piece of paper in front of them is not always the best way. This can help support the young person and help them understand what it's going to be like when they transition into the adult estate, the differences to the youth estate. And this can also help with youngsters with complex needs, such as neurodiversity, divergent conditions, such as ADHD and autism. It's good practice for young people to be given the induction pack prior to their transfer over to the adult estate, so they can get a good understanding of that before they move. Information around support functions, there's many, I won't list them, but peer support is an especially important one. I think Kojo touched on that earlier on as well. Initial support in the early period after the transition can go a long way to that young person having a more settled and enjoyable experience when they transfer to the adult estate. If I can get the next slide, please. So as Lisa said a few minutes ago, some guidance on the transition process there. There's the transition checklist, summary document, the Young Justice Advisors Girls, which has already been published, and a boys one that is currently in development and looking to be launched on the 13th of April. These booklets are informative about what we can expect, what the youngsters can expect, and how we can help them during their transition. A transition animation, which again is work in progress, and a release date for that is to be confirmed. As I touched on a short period ago, there is the young adults page on My Learning. It's particularly good for staff working with these young people to have a better understanding of them. There's Lisa and myself's team email address there as well, Young Adult National Team. And the transition support event, which I think Lisa again mentioned, which will be happening on the 20th of April from 11 to 12:30, which again, all welcome to join. We'll be able to expand on some of the stuff that we've touched on today. Get the next slide, please. And as Lisa said there is the top 24 sites that receive transitions. This is from July of last year to February of this year. As you can see, the numbers for most are not particularly high. The ones at the top do have many, many more. However, we appreciate that the ones with a minimal amount may need more support from us and other people involved because of the few numbers they receive. I think there's been quite a few questions in the chat about how we're going to cope with all these transitions, and I think that will sort of help with some of the concerns there, that we are not receiving, most establishments are not receiving high numbers at any one period of time. That's everything from me, so I'll hand back to Lisa and Lauren.
Thank you so much, Rob and Lisa. That's been really helpful. I think what we'll do is we'll make sure that we just put some information in the chat about where some of these documents can be found. But essentially, we will be uploading onto My Learning all of the documents, which includes the summary pages about the transitions policy framework, checklists that might be helpful for prisons, and also a process document that will be available soon as well, which again just goes into a little bit more detail that isn't in the policy framework. So we will direct everyone to those resources. So what I'd like to do now is just hand over to Lauren again, who's going to go over a bit of a summary of what we've heard so far today. So over to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lisa. So just kind of to summarise what we've heard today and just some next steps I want to talk to you about. I think it's also important when you see those figures with the top 24, they are figures pre-framework. So they just bear in mind that challenge where I said when one establishment says no, they go to the next. We're aiming to actually have a concentrated top 20 ideally, but actually I think it'll be less than top 20. So for some of you, it will impact you more than others. We've heard about the different stages of the transitions framework today. Obviously, you've had background from me and Lisa. We've talked you through briefly the 6 stages of the transitions process. We've heard how Dearbolt have made some inroads towards making those changes from their end, and also some practical tips for implementation and the probation transition. But most importantly, we heard Kojo's helpful views and thoughts. And I think for me, it was really helpful to really humanise the framework and actually why we are doing what we are doing with this framework. I'm really conscious there was a lot of information given to you today in such a short period of time. So as numerous colleagues have mentioned, there is going to be another event in April where we will target that towards the sites that will take the majority of the transitions. We already did some of this with our YCS sites in a high level of detail, where we will talk specifically through the 6 stages of the transition, what that means for the central management team, what that means for the YCS sites, and what that means for the adult sites, and how you can prepare and the steps you need to take to implement towards the framework. Just regarding next steps, so as Deborah stated at the start, we are currently supporting with Operation Safeguard, so we've moved away from the automatic transitions of 18-year-olds more towards 19-year-olds. What that means is in the next month or so, we will start to re-begin transition planning. Just specifically the planning, the transitions won't take place for another 6 months, so you're looking at September time before we start to fully embed the process your end. We are looking at approximately from our current cohort around 15 a month, but that is nationwide. So across the whole of the country, there'll be about 15 transitions each month. The central management team will guide you through the process. I know there will be guidance on My Learning and also on the internet site, but we will consistently keep sending you the same guidance when we allocate transitions as well and work through that with you. Myself and Jermaine are also, you'll get our contact details. We're also always around to answer any further questions as we go through the framework, and it will get easier over time. As Jermaine said at the start, we are working towards hopefully our first transition board in April. That will only be for a select number of transitions that we're working on, so will only impact certain young adult establishments. It won't impact all of you. It will depend on where we identify as the best establishment for that young person. I think that is everything from me. So I'm going to hand back to Lisa, who's just going to introduce the Q&A panel.
Thanks, Lauren. So thank you to our presenters so far. I'm really pleased to see that there's quite a lot of questions that have gone into the chat. So we're going to now take some time to pose some of those questions that have been raised. Just as a reminder, any that we don't get time to answer today or that we need to do more of a collective response to, we'll pose to our panel and come back to you after the event with some written responses. But just to kickstart the Q&A, I'm going to come to you, Lisa, for the first question, please.
Okay, so I think the first question is for Jermaine, and the question is, would the key people on the transitions board from the adult estates be the HOMD and the HOMS, who are the head of OMU and the senior probation officer?
So I'll answer that, sorry, because Jermaine missed the back end of the conversation. We asked that it would be decision makers, so somebody with the authority to accept the young person. So ideally, yes, it would be heads of functions.
Thanks, Lauren. Going to you, Rob, can you give us another question for the panel, please?
Yeah, I think the next one, sorry, this might be for you again, Lauren, but are chaplains invited to the transitions board?
So Rob, maybe not the actual transitions board, which is about acceptance of the young person, but they will be invited to the actual, then the separate meeting, which is the handover meeting where all parties will be invited. And Jermaine's telling me the meeting before as well. So I think it's the original multidisciplinary meeting on site where we identify the child's need and then the handover, but not the actual transitions board in the middle.
Thanks, Lauren. Lisa, next question.
I think you may have touched on this, Lauren, so apologies. But the next question is, are the people attending the transitions board to be specifically from the desired prison? And is this OMU workers or are there specific YA transitions managers?
Yeah, so for example, for the April's board, I think we've got around 6 18-year-olds that we're currently about to commence transition planning for. So it'll be those potential 6 sites. It might be less than 6 sites if multiple are going to the same establishment that will be invited to the transitions board. So it'll be site specific.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Next question, Rob.
So I think this one is for you, Lisa. So is the Timex, if the Timex, sorry, is inside the offender flows, will the CMT still be in place and offer support for the YP?
If the Timex can you repeat that
So
question?
if the Timex or the transfer is inside the offender flows, will the CMT still be in place and offer support via the young person or for the young person?
Yes, they'll be in place no matter what the transition is, whether that's in offender flows or outside of offender flow.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
Lisa?
So this one might be for you, Lisa. So has this framework been discussed in conjunction with OMUs in the adult estate? This is a question particularly around the struggle around caseload and numbers.
So in terms of conversation with OMUs, we've consulted really widely on this whole process right throughout the course of the new process being come up with, and had lots of different functional heads, prison governors, PGDs, lots of partners and stuff that were consulted. So we have consulted really widely. In terms of caseloads, I think one of the things that we've tried to do is reduce the resource requirement that was placed on individual establishments before by creating the central management team. So actually, in terms of the amount of time it would take establishments to have tried to organise transitions and placements all on their own, they now just have to attend the boards and just have to deal with the ones that are really specific to them, and to be able to direct those resources more efficiently. Is there anything else that you would want to say about that, Lauren or Jermaine?
I think we came in right at the end of the transition framework being published, so I'm not sure who was consulted, but I was always led to believe that everybody who it impacted was consulted with.
Yeah. Just as a point to say that if people don't feel like their question has been answered effectively enough, then please do follow that up with another request, and be, if you want to direct us to what explicitly you want more information about, and we'll do our best to get that to you. Coming to you, Rob.
Yeah, the next one we've put to Lisa, but Patricia might be able to get involved in this one as well. So the question is, have we done a review on the experience of young people who have transferred to Dearbolt?
So I can take that one initially, if you like. There are 3 separate evaluations that have been planned for review of the effectiveness of the transitions process. Considering the emphasis today that we've placed on the evidence base, it's really important for us to ensure that anything that we're doing is reviewed and evaluated to see if it's having positive outcomes. So we've got one evaluation that's looking at the perceptions of those who are sentenced to long sentences as part of transition, and Frances Jones, who I believe is on the call with us today, is undertaking that piece of work. That report is due to be out shortly. Additionally, there is another national transitions process evaluation that is in the process of data gathering. So that data gathering obviously needs to go beyond the operational implementation of this new process. So that data gathering will continue for a number of months after today, so that we obviously can evaluate the transition experience pre and post implementation of the new process. There's also an additional evaluation that is taking place of the transitions unit in Dearbolt. An initial review has been done, but considering that the development of that unit has still not been complete, so it hasn't reached all of its objectives yet, there's another evaluation that will need to be done in time to capture whether that's had positive impact or not. So yes, very much lots of reviews and evaluations that are going on. Where am I back to? Lise, am I back with you?
Yeah. So the next question is around, if a young person is transitioned into the adult estates but then moved on to another prison, is there a similar level of guidance for that transfer?
Oh, why have we got echo on there? I don't know. So in response to that,
So I think Jermaine was going to answer. That was why. And we
Oh, sorry, we got confused there.
go ahead, Jermaine.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is that within stage 6 of the policy framework, we have a built-in review. And so within that stage, the central management team will maintain contact with the adult site that the child or young person is currently in. So if for any reason that individual needs to move, we would still hold all of that information and we could support the adult site with the new adult site with the process. Now, it wouldn't be as in depth and detailed as we would have previously have arranged, because we would have had the children and young people secure estate acting as a part of that transition process, but we would still ensure that a lot of the work that we've done hasn't been lost.
Thanks, Jermaine. I think just to add that for any transitions that take place from adult establishment to adult establishment, no, there wouldn't be this much detail that goes into normal adult to adult transfers, and that's then dependent on the induction process that exists in adult prisons. So there is still a mechanism in place to make sure that people are inducted and supported properly when they move, either within a prison category or between prison categories as well. Coming back to you, Rob.
Yeah, this one's for Lauren. What, if any, support is in place for those individuals that are not accepted?
As in not accepted, sorry, you're not going to know the answer to this question, Rob. I was about to ask you the question, as in not accepted on site. So it will be the escalation process. So if we agree that that is the most appropriate establishment for that young person, then we will escalate up to Deputy Governor, and up to PGD where necessarily, with the equivalent at YCS.
And I think, you know, just to echo, I think when I saw that question come through in the chat, it said that must be quite difficult. And I didn't know whether that meant difficult for the individual concerned or difficult for the management team to deal with. Just to say that I think that we would obviously be sensitive with sharing information with the young person about either reasons why they've not been accepted at a particular site until we've got something really concrete to be able to go back with. And ultimately, if they've got to transition, they've got to transition. So a site will be found. And the whole point about this process is that we endeavour to make sure that that placement is done with the needs of the individual, and obviously ensuring safety and security are all at the heart of that decision-making process.
I will say, start to follow the escalation process. You don't actually tend to get far before the young person is accepted. So it's just making sure that we do. That's the whole purpose of the transitions board, is that we have the relevant individuals around the table. If there's only 2 sites that young person could potentially go to, then we would invite both sites to the transitions board so they understand that actually this young person does need to transition somewhere.
Thanks, Lauren. Coming back to you, Lisa.
So it was mentioned earlier that phone contacts should be pre-approved before transitions, but the question is a concern around how the Prison Public Protection Manual and prison IRMTs may conflict with this, and have policy leads in public protection been cited to offer guidance?
So I think that's a really helpful point to raise. I think that we're talking about where there are public protection issues that mean that there are some restrictions that need to be imposed on PIN phone contacts, etc. That is the kind of stuff that we would expect to have been picked up in the meetings where we've got handover of information between the youth site and the adult site. So bearing in mind that any kind of particular security issues, public protection issues, victims issues, anything that is pertinent to that case and that will assist the flow of that transition without kind of those obstacles creating problems is the purpose behind those meetings. So I think that obviously where there are concerns about public protection contacts, we would structure expectations accordingly and just make sure that that information is handed over. Is there anything else that you would want to add for that, Jermaine or Lauren?
So I did mention about having some contacts come along with the young person. And the main point that I'd add is what we don't want to do is transition young people with little or no contacts, because that first night and the induction process can be quite stressful, and we want to make it as comfortable as possible. So it's to make sure that they've at least got a few key contacts, and if there are any other risks associated with others, hopefully we aim to plan to address it, as you've said, Lisa, in that 3-month stage, and I believe 3 months should be enough to deal with that.
Thank you for that. Rob, coming back to you.
Sorry, forgot to unmute myself there. So the next question is for Jermaine. So how well are relationships that are made in youth estates maintained and utilised in the transition once children have moved to the adult estate? Is that done via visits, calls, etc.?
So we are quite a young service in the central management team in terms of transitions, but transitions have been happening for a long time. What I will say is we've regionally allocated the central management team to develop those relationships. So in terms of what happens after a transition and how well and established those relationships are, I wouldn't say they're poor, but I wouldn't say they're great. It's something that we need to build on in time.
The other part of that question, Rob, the reassessment practitioners based in the youth custody service in our estate, they're also part of that follow-up meeting, that 3 to 6 month follow-up meeting when they are in the adult establishment. So they also attend those meetings, and they attend the first either initial sentence planning meeting or remand meeting once they are in the adult establishment as well.
So Deborah, I'm
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you. Coming back to you, Lisa, for the next question.
So in the chat, Deborah said she would take this question. So coming to you, Deborah, we had a question around young adults that come straight from court to a prison who have been in the youth system. So they literally leave the youth custody, go to court and go to the adult estate. Has that been factored into consideration in the transitions process?
So no, it's not, because it's not a transition. However, we've had quite a few cases recently, not massive numbers, but a significant risks of young people who we know very well who turn up. And I'm conscious that it was a colleague from Peterborough asked the question, Neil, because we certainly know you've got one of our young men who was previously in one of our secure children's homes, as well as others. What we will say to you is what I said at the outset: we are always at the end of a phone. So if you have somebody who falls outside the transition process because either they reoffend after having been released, or breach whilst they're on licence, and they disclose at reception that they were in one of our sites, even if it's a secure children's home, if you reach out to us, we will put you into contact with people who know that young person, so that they can share information on risks, triggers and issues. And the central management team in Lauren's world, we will find somebody who knows that young person and put them in contact with you. So I think we're likely to see this more frequently coming up, and I think one of the real advantages of a day like this is, as we all know, it's who you know, not what you know. And now that you know we exist, and we know a lot about young people, please reach out to us, because we can help you provide better care for them once we can share information with you.
Thanks, Deborah, really helpful. Rob, next question.
So I feel like I'm picking on Jermaine and Lauren here, sorry, but is the transition process for young adults the same for all prison categories?
Yes, it's for any transition into the adult estate. So whichever we don't categorise before we transition. We are starting to do some work on the open estate where we may directly transition into the open estate, but apart from that, we don't categorise. The only exception to that is restricted status. And yes, the same transition framework follows for restricted status young people.
Thank you, Lauren. Coming to you again, Lisa.
So I think Lisa Lloyd picked up on this one in the chat, so apologies, Lisa, if you've answered it there. But there's a question around, would it be worth considering a similar resource for complex cases in the women's estates, whether they transition or not? Because this would mean a higher level of interaction with the POMs.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I think I've answered that question as far as I can, really, other than to say that question of resourcing for young adults work is constantly ongoing from a probation perspective. I talked this morning on the prison board about how hopeful we are potentially that the work that we do with young adults will drop into the HMIP schedule over the next 12 to 18 months, because we know that when HMIP direct their focus to specific areas of our work, that can really help from a resourcing perspective. So probation colleagues will know that the IOM refresh framework was introduced a couple of years ago from probation, and that followed an HMIP thematic. So I'd be really interested for HMIP to come and have a look at the work that we do in that young adult space, because I think that certainly helps with conversations around resourcing. All things are up for constant discussion, aren't they, from a probation perspective about resourcing at the minute. I sit on the National Young Adults Group that's chaired by our Regional Probation Director with strategic lead for young adults. So I'll take that specific point into our next meeting when we're next together. But I definitely think what we know anecdotally is that where we have more time and capacity and space to work with that younger adult cohort, we get better outcomes, and that they are fairly resource intensive. So there isn't an immediate plan, no, to do anything differently in that space around resourcing, but it's definitely a conversation that we're open to having, and it's certainly predicated on what we know about how we do that work well. I'll just, Lisa, as well, if that's all right. There was another question, I think, around resourcing too, around, I think, again, a probation colleague asked the question around not being resourced for POMs, so probation staff working in prison, to work with remand sentenced prisoners, and we're not. So that will again have to be something that we'll have to, probably Lisa Short and I, go and have a conversation away from today about whether there is anything that we can do in that space there. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to come to Jermaine and Lauren just to say, is there anything else that you wanted to add on the back of that question? Because again, just to repeat the question, that there's no resource for POMs to work with remands. So how do remands get supported on transition?
It's difficult with remands. It's difficult with remands, even in terms of when we transition remands. That's where we're currently facing most of our population demands. Additionally, when a young person is sentenced on remand, they move to a sentenced establishment. What we aim to do, and I suppose it's probably not fully answering the question, but what we aim to do is transition young people who are sentenced. And if that means waiting and planning, then that's really what we look to try to do. So we dual plan for those who are currently on remand.
Can't hear you anymore, Jermaine. You've gone off.
You put me on mute.
I didn't put you on mute.
Yeah, sorry. We'll dual plan for those who are currently on remand. So if we see that they're on remand for a certain sentence, then we'll look at what likely sentence they'll achieve and where they can potentially go. But ultimately, I think remand is just something that, as a service as a whole, we're currently struggling with, and I don't really want to sit in this meeting, and other people may have more further views that are more extensive than what I'm going to give here, but I don't want to sit in this meeting and explain that we have everything under control with remands, because that's an area that is a challenge.
Yeah, and I think I would just echo that that's certainly a cohort that we're trying to work harder to understand the needs of, and to think about how to try and provide greater support. So yeah, it's not one that is that we can say that we've got to the bottom of, and that they are a more vulnerable transitions group that we recognise. I think, where have we got to now? So as I said before, there are so many more questions that have come through, and I'm really, really grateful for them, because I'm a strong believer in the fact that if one person's asking a question, then, there will be a vast number of people that are also wondering the same thing. We will make sure that we record all of those questions. We will circulate into our panel. I'm also very aware that there's been lots of members of the panel that haven't had an opportunity to give their views on anything. So we'll try and do a bit of a comprehensive Q&A, and we'll get that circulated to all attendees. So thank you for that input. What I would like to take the opportunity to do now is to hand over to Alan Scott, who is the Executive Director of Public Sector Prisons North, to give a keynote summary of today's event. So over to you, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Appreciate that. Sorry I couldn't attend for longer today, but we've got 1 or 2 capacity problems across the system, as most of you will be aware of. But it sounds as if it's been a really useful event, and looking at the questions, some really insightful questions as well. I think just looking back to sort of why we're doing this, I've jotted down probably about sort of three reasons, and I'll go through these in what I would call ascending order of priority. The first one is that actually we made a commitment to Inspectorate of Prisons and ministers that we would improve the transition process. So, we've actually committed to doing that, and we've committed to actually this minister and the previous minister. So that's sort of one reason why, not necessarily, as I'll hopefully show later, the most important reason. I think the transition policy has also been signed off by POMC, with the expectation, as always within the civil service, that we will implement that policy, which I'm confident that we will do. I actually think the third reason for doing this is probably the most important, and if somebody used the phrase "humanise the framework," and I think it's really, really important, because we know that it is critical that we avoid that cliff edge. That cliff edge going from a YCS into an adult establishment. We know, everybody in this call, and will know better than me, because many of you are a lot closer to it, it's a time of anxiety, it's a time of fear, it's a time of vulnerability, time of heightened risk. And we're talking about that being a period when a lot of the people going through that will have their own histories of trauma that will actually heighten the impact of all of this. I think we've got a moral responsibility, basically, to try to make that transition as humane, as considered, and as supportive as possible. Because not only will that then have a potentially positive impact on what time they've got left in custody, but actually, hopefully, it will have a positive impact on the rest of their lives. And I think that actually is probably the most important reason for doing this. And it's also the most important reason for doing it properly. There's some really good questions that were asked, and we haven't got answers to all of them, because we don't live in an ideal world where resources are infinite, and we will have to make the best we can. But I'm confident that what we will do is actually make that transition less painful for everybody by actually applying the policy. So I'm really grateful for the work that everybody's put into this. It's been a journey to get to this point. It's been a journey against a background of all sorts of resource challenges, COVID, you name it. Everything's been thrown at it. The only thing missing was probably a plague of locusts, to be honest. But I think what has been achieved is actually quite amazing. And it will potentially transform that really critical part, quite frankly, of somebody's life. And, for me, that's what makes it worthwhile. Not the fact that we've committed to the minister or we've committed to HMIP or that POMC want us to do this. I very firmly believe we should do this because it's the right and proper thing to do. And I think for that reason, with my experience in the prison service, we will make it work because it's the right thing for us to do, and we will make it work. So that basically is all I've got to say, Lisa, because I'm conscious it's been a long afternoon for most of you. So I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Alan. Really grateful for that closing keynote there. And so I'd like to thank you, Alan, all of our speakers today and our panelists. I would also like to give thanks to Chris Holmes, Jill Turton and Dan Nickling from the HMPPS Insights team for their support with arranging and facilitating this event. We fully acknowledge the challenges faced with frontline delivery across HMPPS at the moment, and really hope that the event today has provided some useful information and reassurance of the support available. As I have said, we will make sure that all of those support documents and resources are made available on the chat and also in the post follow-up information that we send out. The event on April the 20th, which will be another online event, which will be predominantly for the top 20 prisons that we've identified that take transitions. But if anyone else would like to come to that event, then please do get in contact with either myself, Lauren, Jermaine, Lisa Cheshire or Rob Twaits, or use the young adults team functional mailbox, and you can request to attend that and we'll send you the link. A post-event email that will come out will also ask you for your valuable feedback so that we can tailor further events to meet your needs. You can see that the QR codes for the event feedback are on the closing slide there. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for the incredible turnout today and for your interest and support in taking this work forward. Thank you and goodbye.